Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this episode we are going to rebuild a leaf spring from a U23, which is a light truck able to carry about 4,000 kilograms of load. But it really doesn't matter what type of car it is, because the methodology is in essence the same. This is the spring of an MGB GT, and you can see it's a lot smaller, it has a lot less leaves. The attachment is about the same on the top and on the bottom, so it has no shackle, as you can see on the other one. And the way it's been held together is slightly different. It's been squeezed together with some metal bars, and that's it. So it's a lot smaller, easier to work on. For most cars, you might not want to rebuild the leaf pack because you can buy them very cheap and they're still available. But before we actually start doing the work, let's have a look of what the leaf spring is all about, what kind of forces are applied to it, and what are the different types of mounting or installation of those leaf springs. The leaf spring is a combination of multiple blades all held together and then mounted on top of the rear axle or below the rear axle. These leaves are fabricated in a very special way. They are consisting of spring steel, which is treated at high temperatures. So in essence, they get a metal bar, which is called spring steel. They're going to roll it flat under a high temperature, probably around 1,000 degrees centigrade. And by rolling it flat, it's going to create more strength in the length, in the longitude of that metal bar. After that, the metal is treated again with heat, and they're going to heat it up to about 850 degrees centigrade, after which they're going to cool it down real quick. Now that's going to make it very brittle. Now in order to get rid of the brittle of the metal, they're going to reheat it again to about 600 to 550 degrees centigrade and then let it cool down. So now we have a very strong and hard piece of steel which can withstand a lot of torsion and a lot of forces. And finally, they will actually press the leaf into a form. We call it the camber, and that's either mechanical or it's done under heat. And then finally, they add all the leaves together, they put some clamps on it, and that is going to be our leaf spring. The leaf spring typically connects at 3 points, 2 to the chassis and then 1 point to the rear stiff axle, with a pen like this and a bolt fitted into a socket or a pocket on the frame itself. Depending on the application, you will find a shackle on the other side, which allows the leaf to move more, so the leaf has more articulation with a shackle. And then all the leaves are held together with brackets, and it depends on your specific leaf spring. You may have only 2 of these brackets, but you may have 4 or 6. It all depends on your spring, but there will always be some kind of retainer to keep these blades together. And that brings us to the third point. Where is the rear axle connected? Well, that can be on the top of the leaf spring or on the bottom, and both have advantages and disadvantages. This is the view underneath the Ford Ranger, and you can see that the leaf spring is on top of the rear axle. And we have actually an increased riding height. It also allows you to load more weight onto the vehicle. But the problem is that the point of gravity is lifted up, so the stability is less and the driving comfort will be a little bit less. But if you go off-roading, then obviously that is a common practice to move the spring on top of the rear axle. But there's one negative side on that one, and that's the warp factor. Whenever you're accelerating very fast or putting a lot of torque onto your drive shaft, your diff or your rear axle will tend to tilt up or down a bit. And that's going to twist the leaf spring in an S form. And once you let the throttle go again, it's going to bounce back. You might have seen that on cars sometimes. If you're going to accelerate very fast, that the rear wheels are kind of hopping, or we call that also tramping. This is where you find often on the rear axles an anti-tramp bar. And that's going to be more explicit when the axle is actually mounted underneath the springs. So if you want to reduce that, you can then move the axle above the springs. So the springs are now under the axle. That is lowering the riding height. It also reduces a little bit the flexibility for heavy loads. It's not good for off-terrain driving because the car is too low to the ground. But it improves riding stability because the point of gravity is lower, and also the warp factor is less. And that's just because the handle, and it's a fictive handle, between the diff, the rear axle, the pinion, let's say, and the central line of the spring is now shorter than if the spring is on top of the rear axle. And therefore, there is less warping force applied when the spring is mounted underneath the rear axle. So these are things to consider.
And as you can clearly see on the U23, these springs are mounted underneath the axle. So this is going to be quite a job.
So now the question really is, why would we want to rebuild a leaf spring? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, you may have rust in between the blades. And that's going to make it squeaky. It's going to make the complete pack more rigid. It's not going to move as good as it should. So it's not going to be all that great. You may also have problems with the brackets. They may be rusted, like in this case, and you may have issues where it connects to the frame. Maybe these pins are worn out. You may actually have a broken leaf, which then you would have to replace. The brackets that hold the leaf back together, they may be bent. Or the blades don't line up properly anymore. It's all kind of shifted. And of course, if things are kind of twisted or broken, you even may have to replace the complete spring altogether. But in my case, these springs are looking in a pretty good condition, and before I took them from underneath the vehicle was standing straight and flat. There were no issues, and we did a visual inspection on the spring pack, and there was nothing wrong with it. No, nothing is broken. But we'll see more on that. Maybe there's more damage and wear and tear inside. So this is why I'm going to take these apart. We're going to derust them, in fact, shot blast them, and then we're going to repaint them with graphite-based paint. And some people don't like paint, I know, and we'll come back to the paint story, and then we're going to put it all back together with new bolts, and then we'll make sure that all the brackets are good and all the pins are good. And then we should have a proper, good, well-conditioned leaf spring. So before taking the leaf spring apart, it's always good to make sure that all the parts are kind of labeled or kept in the same order, because they all have developed wear and tear. And you don't want to put things back together in a different arrangement, because wear and tear surfaces are mated to each other. So you want to put it back in the same way. So that is good to label it. You can label it with paint, or you can put marks on them. And that's what I've done throughout the whole process. I kept everything in the proper position. It's paying a bit of attention to it because it's easy to mix it all up, but at the end it worked pretty well. I kept one spring on the side, which was intact, and I took one fully apart so we could actually get these things properly put back together afterwards, as I had a model which was still intact. So let's start to disassemble the old leaf and then get it all cleaned up and sprayed, and then we're going to reassemble it.
And the first job in the progress is removing the springs from underneath the vehicle. And in my case, I had lifted up the chassis with some engine stands, and I started to remove the shackles on the rear springs. Also, the rear axle was fully supported with a jack, because these things are heavy. So it depends a bit on your specific vehicle on how you can remove the springs, but they need to come from underneath the vehicle. Once I had the springs removed from the frame, I could roll out the complete rear axle together with the springs. With the complete rear axle removed from the chassis, I could now remove the leaf spring. I first removed the wheels and the wheel hub, and I was trying to unleash these nuts. But that wasn't all that easy. I had to heat it up to unlock those nuts. But at the end, they all came free, and I was able to continue without having anything damaged. But getting the leaf spring off that rear axle turned out to be a little bit more difficult. Nevertheless, I cleaned everything up, and I could start to disassemble the leaf springs, and as you can see, those are in multiple pieces. They are like a multi-stack leaf spring. I kept all the bolts and the brackets very well together, It makes it easier to later reassemble it, especially if you have to buy new bolts. And as you can see, we got a lot of rust in between the leaves. But luckily, none of the leaves was broken or severely damaged or even lame. So I could just reuse it. All they needed was a big cleanup. I use the clamp to keep them together in some cases because they can be loaded, so always be careful with that. And here I'm about ready to shot blast the leaves. I've been shot blasting them with Garnet 360. Not a fun job to do, but at the end I reassembled all of them in the same order as they came from underneath the vehicle, and they were ready to be painted in the paint booth with a graphite-based paint, which is ideal for leaf springs. Also, the brackets and the bolts and so on, they were all in a good shape, so they were being repainted, and I'm using a small paint gun for that, not to waste too much paint. And here you see the leaves or the blades all being painted on all sides and drying in the paint booth for a couple of hours. The brackets were also painted, although I was initially planning to powder coat these parts, but I did not. And here you see a powder coating gun. Unfortunately, I didn't have my video camera on when I did the parts, so here I'm just showing you another part not related to the springs at all, but it shows on how I did apply powder coating to the shackle that you will see in a few seconds when it's drying in the oven. So here we have the oven. It's set at about 178 degrees centigrade, and this is an old kitchen oven. And here you see the shackle from the suspension. Initially it was dull and matte, but now it is cured and the powder coating is ready. This result is very nice, and I always like powder coating because it gives you a real nice finish. And here you see it in more of a close-up, and also I've cleaned up the pins. So I think this part is now ready to be installed as soon as the leaf springs are being put back together.
Very often there is a debate on what should happen with the individual leaf blades. Should you paint them? Should you not paint them? Should you grease them? Should you not grease them? My personal take is, well, I want to prevent rust. I also want to make sure that the blades inside are moving freely and smoothly. Not too much, but just enough. I don't want them to start oscillating. I'm just going to put them together with some graphite-based paint, just a thin coat, so that will prevent rust to some extent. Of course, when the spring is in use, it's going to develop more friction areas, and it's going to take the paint away, and it will rust there as well. But graphite-based paint is good. It protects both the metal, and it also has a greasing effect. A greasing effect which is dry. If you use real grease, which some people do, that's going to collect dirt and grit. And that dirt and sand and grit will get in between them, and it's going to act as abrasive paper. So it's better to have a dry basis. Now also, I'm using a PTFE spray on top of the paint. And of course, you can leave it as bare metal as well, if that is what you want. Another approach to separate the leaves from each other is a small Teflon piece. That's what you see right here in between the leaves. That's very good, but it may not always be available. And on the truck leaf that I'm working on, that was certainly not common practice. But this is another good approach. Paint it and then have these Teflon strips in between them. Here we got all the leaf blades and the paint booth. We have actually painted them with the graphite-based paint. And then we sprayed them with PTFE after it dried for about 2 weeks. And now we can actually reassemble it. And as you can see, I have kept everything nicely together in the right order. After the paint cured for about 3 weeks, I used PTFE to spray on that. And the good thing about this product is that it provides a nice protective layer, and it's not greasy at all, or at least not wet greasy. I let it sit on there for a while, and then I'm going to wipe it clean. So all the brackets have been repainted, and we're going to use new bolts to put everything back together with a self-locking nut. And the bolts have the same dimensions as the original ones. So here we have a bigger bracket, and you can see if I try to put that on there, I require the spring to be compressed, so I have to put some pressure on the spring. So then we install the new bolt with the bushing inside, and obviously the bracket will come around it to hold it all together. But therefore I need to compress the spring together to have that in place. So at some moment in time you really will have to put some clamps on the spring to keep it together. When putting the bolts in their final sleeve, I like to apply copper grease to it. So if I ever have to take it apart again, it's not going to be seized. But of course, that won't happen in my lifetime anymore. As I mentioned before, it is important that you do respect the order and the way the leaves are placed initially, because you will have wear and tear areas like this one. If I place the next blade onto it, as you can see, that wear and tear part is matching up exactly right, so I know this is the right direction. If I would have done it in the other direction, then you can see that doesn't work. So it's important to place it in the original position. So this appears to be my first pack that I have to connect together now. I have 4 brackets. I have brackets on the side here. These are loosely in, they are not in place yet. Those I could fit. But these brackets, I have to put pressure onto the leaf to squeeze that together. So that's one thing we'll need to do. I don't think I will be able to do it by hand. So I have my copper greased insert. This is the bushing that goes in. We got the bolt and the bracket. Feeding it through. And then we add the self-locking nut on the other side. And really, that's all there is to it. I'm having the bushing already in and the bracket, but I can't fit the bolt yet because I need to squeeze the spring together a bit. I need to squeeze together the spring a bit. Almost. And here we go. Bring the bracket up. Now I can release the spring. So that is our first part of the pack, which is now in place. Now the bolt has to sit in the other direction, and hopefully it stays in. So now I'm going to add the rest of the blades to it. And let's see if this is the right way or not. I did mark them, but I want to make sure that the wear and tear marks are right. And this is looking good. So I keep going. So this is the good thing about keeping things in order. Now I know this one is not right. I can see the wear and tear on that side. So I need to turn it over. Now that lines up. So I got that twisted somehow during the shot blasting most likely. And the next one up. Let's see. Yeah, it's also that direction. Right. So this is how we are building the whole stack. And at some point it will become fairly heavy. And now we really have a big blade. Okay. And that one, I think, is sitting in the right place. Yeah. And we keep on building. Again, checking the wear and tear areas. And this might have been the other way around. That looks more like it. And at some point we'll have to start squeezing this together. You can see the bolt is now getting barely through. So we have to start squeezing it. Okay, now the bolt is gone. I don't know if this is going to work. If it doesn't work, then we have to do it on the press. But it looks like this is going to work. Although I can now start feeling the pressure on it. Well, a little bit more. Bolt is now just coming out on the top. Now it's tough. I'm going to try to give it a bit more. So I can put the nut up. If I can squeeze this so far until the brackets have free play, then we should be good to go. I think the bracket will now fit, and all we need to do now is to put the bolt through it, and we should be good to go. I can see the marks on the side where it has been scraping a bit, so that's good. So I know everything is installed the way it was. The leaf is now completely assembled, and we also cleaned up the shackle and the pins that go through it so we can install it on the frame or the chassis. So now we need to do the second one. So you've seen this is not all that complicated, and this will probably be good for a couple more years. So thank you for viewing, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.